So Canada and Japan didn't just make a deal this week, Deb. They sent a message. Japan just committed billions of dollars to rebuild its own domestic energy infrastructure on Japanese soil, specifically to process Canadian oil. That, my friends, is just another signal that indicates where the global economic order is heading and who's driving it.
And this isn't a one-off, people. What we're watching right now in real time is the systematic sidelining of the United States as the world's energy manager. Canada found new buyers, Japan found stable supply, and Uncle Sam got the invoice for 50 years of treating a trading partner like a captive resource colony.
Look, the Kuzma review deadline passed back on July 1st. We all know that. And Washington expected Canada to show up hat in hand, ready to accept whatever terms were on the table. Well, Prime Minister Carney is showing up with a Pacific Gateway instead. So today, we're breaking down the 3 moves that just happened. Japan's oil commitment to Canada, the $1 billion critical minerals pact with Japan, and the Norwegian missile contract. And we're going to show you exactly what Washington's imperial hubris is going to cost the American working class at the pump, because it adds up to something they're not going to like.
To understand why Japan moved this fast, you have to understand Japan's single biggest national security nightmare. Japan is one of the most advanced industrial economies on Earth. Precision manufacturing, robotics, a massive consumer base. But Japan is one stray missile or blocked shipping lane away from the lights going out in Tokyo. 90 to 95% of Japan's crude comes from the Middle East, shipped through some of the most contested waters on the planet.
And the whole time, the assumption was that the American alliance was the insurance policy, right? Stay inside that U.S. umbrella, trust the shipping lanes, keep Middle East crude flowing. But then, Trump started threatening his own allies. And Japan, one of the most analytically precise governments on Earth, watched what happened to Canada. Watched a 50-year trade partner get treated like a problem to be managed. And Japan's energy minister, he did the math. If the American alliance has conditions, it's not an insurance policy, it's a protection racket.
Japan is so desperate to divorce itself from the Middle East chaos that it's fundamentally altering its own sovereign infrastructure to take Canadian supply instead. Japan built its refineries decades ago to handle light Middle Eastern crude. But they're now retrofitting those refineries, building specialized coker units in Japanese soil, specifically to process Alberta's heavy oil sands crude. That is a 30-year strategic commitment. And Japan, they don't take those decisions lightly.
And why? Because Canada represents the one thing the United States and the Middle East can no longer offer. Long-term, unthreatened stability. No tariff threats. No military brinkmanship, just a pipeline, a port, and a reliable partner. Japan said yes before anyone could change their mind.
Now, here's the part of the story that Trump doesn't want you to know, because it makes the American energy industry look very, very bad. For 50 years, over 95% of Canadian crude had one destination: south, right across the U.S. border. Not because Canada chose that, though. It was because there was no pipeline to the Pacific. Alberta had one customer, and they knew that.
They paid 15% below the global benchmark for Canadian heavy crude because Canada had nowhere else to go. They bought it cheap, refined it, and sold the products back to American consumers at full market price. That spread, the gap between what they paid Alberta and what they charged at the pump, went straight into the corporate pockets. The American working class never saw a cent of it.
For 50 years, the American energy sector treated Canada like a captive resource colony, and Washington assumed that it could keep doing that indefinitely, right up until it decided to layer tariffs on top of it. Because obviously, if you're going to demand a massive discount on your neighbor's fuel, the smart play is to threaten to burn the neighborhood down, right? That is apparently the Trump strategy.
Yeah, and that is exactly what Mark Carney called them on. Washington assumed Canada would show up just begging at the Kuzma deadline on July 1st, ready to accept whatever they throw on the table. But Prime Minister Carney showed up with that Pacific Gateway instead. Trans Mountain hits full capacity, 1 million barrels a day direct to the Pacific.
And here's the thing Trump still hasn't absorbed in his tiny little brain. The clearance sale is over. The 15% discount that Midwestern refineries built their entire margin structure on, gone. When Canadian crude has become a competitive Pacific buyer, American refineries have to bid at world prices now. When corporate margins get squeezed, executives don't take pay cuts, they pass it on to the pump. The people who feel that first are the same Americans who were told that getting tough on Canada was protecting them.
It wasn't protecting them. It was protecting a discount that flowed to the refiners, not the drivers. And if your neighbor keeps threatening to burn down your neighborhood, you don't just give them a discount on gasoline. You bypass them entirely. And that's exactly what Canada just did.
And the oil deal, it's just the first layer. Because Canada and Japan also signed a $1 billion critical minerals pact, direct bilateral agreements between Canadian and Japan companies, covering battery metals, rare earths, and the materials that every electric vehicle, every advanced semiconductor, and every modern weapon systems needs and depends on.
Right now, China controls somewhere between 60 and 80% of global critical minerals processing. Japan knows it. Canada knows it, and both countries have decided to build an alternative supply chain together without going through a U.S. intermediary and without remaining dependent on Beijing. That is the explicit purpose of this pact. Reduce the China exposure and build the Canada-Japan pipeline instead.
For Canada, this is enormous. We have the reserves. We have the geological wealth. What Canada has never had is a direct buyer relationship with a major industrial economy that doesn't run through American trade structures. This pact builds exactly that. Japan gets supply chain security on critical minerals. Canada gets to sell at world prices to committed long-term partners. No America in sight.
And this is all part of the master plan, right? Prime Minister Carney's been laying this groundwork for months. The Davos speech, the G7 meetings, the Pacific Trade Framework. He set the stage. He sold Canada into the right rooms. And then Canadian businesses moved in and made the deals. That's how this is supposed to work. And it's working.
And let's not forget Norway, the $800 million Kongsberg missile contract. This one did not get a lot of coverage because of the submarine deal, but it is another move that strengthens our global position. It may be smaller in dollar terms than the other two, but it is possibly the most pointed statement of all three. Canada is buying Joint Strike Missiles from Norway, specifically the missiles that will arm the Royal Canadian Air Force's future fighter fleet. Not American missiles, Norwegian.
Think about what Trump expected here. NATO partners were being pressured to hit defense spending targets. The assumption baked into every Pentagon briefing was that higher European and allied defense budgets meant higher orders for American defense contractors. Spend more, buy American. That was the logic, except Canada didn't.
Look, Canada committed publicly to meeting its NATO obligations. Prime Minister Carney said it, and he meant it. But Canada is meeting those commitments by building defense relationships with European allies, Norway, Germany, Sweden, a deliberate diversification away from U.S. supply chains. And here's what makes the Kongsberg deal particularly sharp. It wasn't just a purchase. It came with a reciprocal investment, like almost all of the deals he's been making. Kongsberg and BCIT are establishing a marine innovation simulation center of excellence right here in Canada, in British Columbia. And that's the through line on all of Carney's defense deals. Canada has to get something in return. So Canada got a technology center built on Canadian soil on this one as well.
So compare that to the alternative, sending $800 million to a U.S. defense company who then turns around and uses that leverage to demand more trade concessions at the next round of CUSMA talks. Canada got smarter about this. You meet your NATO commitment, you get industrial capacity built here, you send a clear signal about where Canada's defense partnerships are headed. Everyone in Brussels noticed, Washington noticed too, They just haven't figured out what to say about it.
Because what do you say, Dave? Canada met its NATO target. Canada bought world-class military equipment. Canada got industrial capacity built at home. The only thing Canada didn't do was make American defense contractors richer. And somehow that is the problem.
So let's add this all up, because it's great. The Trans Mountain expansion ends the captive oil discount permanently. And when those Midwestern refinery margins collapse, American drivers, they're the ones who pay at the pump. The Japan Critical Minerals Pact builds a direct supply chain between Canadian reserves and Japanese industry, bypassing both Washington and Beijing in a single stroke. And the Norway missile contract? Well, it sends Canada's NATO spending to a European partner who built us a technology center in return.
So, July is going to be studied for a very long time because this is what it looks like when a middle power stops acting like a captive resource colony, yes, I'm saying it again, and starts operating like a sovereign country with real options. Washington treated Canada like it had no other moves. It turns out Canada has been building these moves quietly for years.
Because that is what happens when you act like a drunken landlord demanding premium rent from a building the rest of the world has already vacated.
So here's today's question. Of these three deals, the Japan oil infrastructure commitment, the billion-dollar critical minerals pact, or the Norway missile contract, which one delivers the biggest long-term blow to American leverage over Canada? All of the above can be an option as well.
Yes.
And if you want to understand how all of this connects to Canada's full defense overhaul, hit subscribe if you haven't done that already and share it with somebody who needs to know. It really helps us out. And also give it that like and hype. We need it, babe.
And go down there in the pinned comment and check out all the fun stuff. Our Substack, our merch store, and the new Facebook group.
Thanks for watching, everyone.
And we'll see you tomorrow.
Ciao for now.